So let's welcome on Harrison Zuckerberg today, one of our fantasy coaches here at Fantasy Football Fellowship, to talk more about the risky players. Harrison, who are you taking a risk on this year? Let's hear it.
The first guy who I've taken a risk on in pretty much every draft that I've done so far is Justin Fields. And I know that seems really risky to draft a quarterback that doesn't really throw the ball, but I think Justin Fields is going to have an incredible season this year. He had an incredible season last year on a bad Bears team with no weapons. He finished as the QB6 a lot because of the rushing that he was doing. But now if he can just increase his passing volume by a little bit, the addition of DJ Moore, I think the sky's the limit for Justin Fields. I honestly don't think he's that much of a risk because even if nothing improves, he probably finishes around the QB 6 or 7 again, which is where he's being drafted right now. So even though he's viewed as a really risky player because we really don't know what we're going to get from this Bears team, we don't know what we're going to get from the offense, I think he's going to be great for fantasy no matter what happens.
Yes, I think where you took him in your drafts, I think it's definitely worthwhile. But yeah, he carries some risk. For me, and I'll kind of lead off with this as we talk about our teams and all that kind of thing. Nick Chubb is my guy this year. And you may say, well, is Nick Chubb really risky? Well, here are a couple of reasons why he might be risky. He's a little bit older. He had a lot of carries in recent years. And I'm buying the fact that he's going to be a three down back, that on third downs, he's actually going to catch passes. Because if we look at the history, that hasn't necessarily been his game. So there's a risk there. There's also the risk of Deshaun Watson and just the disaster of the Browns. Any Browns player is a risk. All right. So there you go. However, for those of you watching the Fantasy Football Fellowship podcast, here is my guy this year, Nick Chubb. This is a box of cereal. It is Cinnamon Toast Squares Chubb Crunch. That's right. So here's the funny story. So at my draft this past weekend, we were all together, all my high school buddies, our 20th draft. And one of the guys thought that he was going to draft Nick Chubb with, I think, the 11th or 12th pick. I took Chubb at 8. And so in some ways, you may say, ooh, it's a little risky to take him at 8 and pass on, some other stud wide receivers. I think I passed on Diggs and Tyreek Hill and, passed on Tony Pollard, who carries his own risk. But I'm in on Chubb this year. And then after that draft, I end up snagging him in another league in the second round. I took Christian McCaffrey second overall, and then Nick Chubb came all the way back around, and I got him again. And so whether it's in the first round or the second round, I'm overcoming or willing to take the step of faith with Chubb because I think he's a premier running back. And there are very few premier, solid, been there, done that guys. So I'm taking him. And every running back has high risk, basically. That's the story of the position. So let's also talk about Jonathan Taylor, because he's probably the riskiest player if you're drafting from now until the start of the season. Where do you come out on Jonathan Taylor and the latest news that he will not be traded, at least for now?
Yeah, the news that came out was pretty much a worst case scenario for Jonathan Taylor because honestly, his upside was looking a little bit better with the trade rumors because he might go to a team like the Bears or like the Eagles or Miami where they're going to have elite offenses and he has chances to score around the goal line. Unlike in Indianapolis right now, where we have no idea what we're going to see out of Anthony Richardson in this Colts offense. So not only does he not get traded and is probably in the worst possible offense for his skill set, but he's also now going to miss the first 4 games of the season with the injury that has been lingering from last year. So I'm looking at this situation kind of similar to the Alvin Kamara situation in New Orleans. We know that they're going to be out for the first 3 games for Kamara, 4 games for Taylor, and we're going into a completely new offense where, we've seen Derek Carr before, but what are we really going to get from Derek Carr in New Orleans? What are we going to get from Anthony Richardson in Indianapolis? I would honestly say that the prospects for Kamara are probably higher in New Orleans with that offense as a whole with Indianapolis. But we see Kamara going in, 7th, 8th round of drafts, depending on what format you're on.
Steal.
But we have Jonathan Taylor still going in the second round, maybe early third round, depending on how your league drafts or how much guys want to take the risk. I just don't think there should be that much a gap between those two players. Yes, the big difference between the two of them is that Alvin Kamara is much older than Jonathan Taylor, and Jonathan Taylor is a much more explosive running back. But situation-wise, I really don't think they're that much different. So I would not be drafting Jonathan Taylor unless he was in like the fourth round for me, really. I do not think he's worth a pick as your top, 3 draft choices. If you got him as an RB2, then I think the risk is worth it. But I cannot see you building your team around a guy who is going to miss the first 4 games. And then even when he comes back, we have no idea what his role is going to be within the offense.
It is a mess. And so that's why, like we're talking about today, we've got to know the difference of when to take the risk and when to pass on the risk, and to know, that's a dangerous risk. That's unwise. Jonathan Taylor, I'm buying the narrative. It's just not worth it. He's just one of those guys you just take off your board. And I think I try to do that with a lot of players just to narrow down, the focus of guys that I want to draft and trust and rely on. And, like I said, in the last few weeks, Josh Jacobs is on that list with kind of what he dealt with holding out and all that. And then with Jonathan Taylor, it's just it's way too fuzzy for me. Now listen, I won't be surprised if somebody, snags him late in a draft and Jonathan Taylor ends up getting traded later in the season and ends up being, unbelievable the last 4 weeks of the season and could win fantasy leagues for people. It's possible. I'm not going to take that risk. So I'm with you on that one. All right. 2 other quarterbacks we'll talk about. So Lamar Jackson, of course, always risky with the injuries, and Tua Tagovailoa also always, kind of an issue on the injuries, especially last year. So of those 2 players, who are you more likely to take a risk on?
I don't think I'm taking a risk on Lamar just because of how high he's going in drafts. Lamar's going ahead of, Joe Burrow now after Joe Burrow's injury. He's going ahead of Justin Herbert, ahead of Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence. That's way too high for me. I'm much more in on Tua, not as a starter, but I think he can be a really good backup. I've taken him as a backup QB in some of my leagues because the potential is there for him to have a great season. We saw how good he was last year when he was on the field with Tyreek Hill, with Jalen Waddle in this Miami offense. You just don't want to have to depend on him every single week because he's a little bit inconsistent. And also the injury risks are there. We want to act like he's all good from the concussions. That was just a last season thing. He's healthy now. But even before that, he was always banged up for the first couple seasons, never really played a full year. So I think he's a great backup QB as someone who has really high upside and could certainly finish as a top 7 or 6 QB if the touchdowns fall his way. But I don't think he is worth drafting as your starter.
Yeah, I'm more willing to take the risk on Lamar Jackson, but it's got to be a little bit later than where he's been going. So I'd be more comfortable, around 5 type of thing. So if I'm staring at, I'd still probably take Herbert and Lawrence over him. But if for some reason he slipped past those guys and that was who was available, I'd be willing to take it just because I do like Lamar. But yeah, he's too risky. I will say just a couple other kind of risky situations. I think Seattle and San Francisco, I love these offenses, but there is some risk just kind of across the board in both situations because in Seattle, the running backs have been injured and we don't fully know, okay, is it going to be a full workhorse type of situation for Kenneth Walker? They drafted Charbonnet. Where does he fit in? So there's some risk with both of those guys. I passed on the Charbonnet risk in one league. I was staring at him. I go, I can't do it. But I took the risk with DK Metcalf because could this be the case where JSN comes in and he chips into Metcalf's kind of workload? I'm willing to take that risk. And then in San Francisco, it's the risk of too many mouths to feed. It's also the risk of CMC being injured, but I took that risk. I'm willing to go for it because when he's out there, he puts up as many fantasy points as anybody in the league. And that's always been the case. No matter who the quarterback is, no matter what team he's on, he does it. He's just about being healthy.